Laws and justice are important for the smooth running of society. For instance, it's important for people to be protected from criminals and to be able to live in peace. It's also an important deterrent. Laws can help people by keeping them safe from criminals, but it can also put criminals off committing crimes in the first place. Deter means to put off. It gives us clear guidelines for how to behave so we know right from wrong, and it helps to create fair and equal societies where everyone takes responsibility for their actions. Responsibility then is taking care of yourself and making sure that you do the right thing. Justice is enforced by the police and law courts. Laws are rules that govern human relationships and society, making it safer to live in. Under the law, we have to take responsibility for the way we choose to behave. Justice, then, is the process of allocating rewards or punishments and maintaining what is right. St. Aquinas, or St. Thomas Aquinas, argued that an unjust law is not a proper law. This is because people will feel that it is acceptable to break bad laws, and it may lead to people to think that all laws are unjust. It could also lead to negative consequences like rioting and civil wars. This would make laws the cause of problems in society rather than solutions. For instance, in the case of the civil rights movement, many people broke the law. In the 1960s, Martin Luther King and his followers campaigned against the unjust treatment of black people. They fought against segregation laws. Arguably, St. Thomas Aquinas would argue that these are unjust laws and therefore not proper laws. Since people felt that it was acceptable to break the law, people thought that most of the laws at that time were unjust, and it had negative consequences like rioting. People in the 1960s then fought for equality because they felt the laws were unjust. Rosa Parks was another person who broke the law. She sat down on a bus and refused to move, even though white people only were allowed to sit in that seat. Similarly, in South Africa, Nelson Mandela used terrorist techniques to fight against apartheid, the legal separation of black and white people. Many civil wars have also started as a result of having laws that are perceived as being unfair, for instance in Kosovo. These are examples of criminals who most people would argue were unfairly accused of being criminals because the laws themselves were unfair. If you asked should people always follow the law, you might want to consider these examples. The UK has a legal aid system which gives help to people who are less well off who have been accused of crimes. Many people, however, argue that the legal system is still unjust. For instance, legal aid has been cut dramatically in this country, meaning that people who are richer are more likely to afford a good lawyer and are therefore more likely to get off certain crimes. Certain crimes, such as rape as well, are very difficult to get convictions on, find someone guilty of, because evidence is hard to obtain. Similarly, even though the symbol for justice is that justice is blind, lots of people would argue that it's not, since you are about 3 times more likely to be accused of a crime or put to death if you are black in the United States. People who are poor are also far, far, far more likely to get accused and committed of crimes, and are more likely to get longer sentences. A sin is different to a crime. It is an act that goes against the will of God. Many people may not believe that sins exist because they don't believe that God exists, so these rules do not apply to everyone. Some sins, such as adultery or cheating, are not against the law, whereas other crimes, such as speeding, are not sins. If people think a law of God is wrong, they do not need to follow it. Sometimes people may protest against the church or other religious institutions if they feel it is behaving wrongly. However, if the law seems unfair, many people are likely to protest or campaign, for instance against taxes. Laws are made in Parliament. A proposed law, called a bill, is first of all debated in the House of Commons. Then, if it's passed as a vote, it's debated in the House of Lords, which incidentally contains some bishops on the panel, hence the link with the Church of England. It will then, after it's been approved at this stage, need to get royal assent. This is the Queen's final vote. She, remember, is the head of the Church of England. Finally, if she agrees, the law is passed. We've seen this really clearly in the case of gay marriage. After a series of debates, votes and royal assent, the law has now been passed to allow same-sex marriage in this country. You will also need to know about judgment and justice. Judgment is the act of judging others. In this picture you can see God punishing Adam after he ate the apple and banishing him from the Garden of Eden. This suggests that God can punish people, which is quite a harsh form of punishment, as well as forgive them. Christians believe that they should behave justly or fairly through treating others in a fair way. This is because God is just and wants people to behave in the same way, according to the Bible. Secondly, Jesus taught that everyone should be treated equally, and this suggests that we should look after other people and treat them in a fair way. The golden rule, to treat others as you wish to be treated, can also apply. If we want to live in a just society, then that's what we should try and create. Furthermore, on Judgment Day, God will punish and reward people, according to the Bible. And finally, God is forgiving, so people should arguably show agape or Christian love in order to try and be the same as Jesus and make sure society is fair. This is also exemplified in the parable of the goats and the sheep, a story that you've previously looked at. In Matthew 25:31, Jesus says that God will separate the sheep from the goats, symbolising the people who have helped others, the sheep, versus the people who haven't, the goats. And those are horns. Jesus taught that it is the duty of Christians to help the sick, the poor, and those in prison. For if you do that for them, it's as though you were doing it for Jesus as well. Christians try to bring justice into the world by sharing resources and giving money to charity. Christian Aid, for instance, works in areas of poverty around the world by campaigning against injustice and providing resources and money for the poor. This is another example of showing agape love and following the golden rule. It seeks to change the policies of government in rich countries by campaigning against debts that have been imposed on poorer nations. CAFOD, the Catholic Fund for Overseas Development, campaigns for justice for the poor of the world, and in recent years has campaigned against landmines, the debt owed by third world countries, and for rich nations to give money to the poor. Their mission statement is to promote human development and social justice in witness to the Christian faith and gospel values. You could also refer to some specific quotations in your answers. For instance, if you're talking about agape love, you could say, "Be merciful, do not judge, and you will not be judged," from Luke 6:36. Or you could talk about the famous story where Jesus forgave the adulterous woman, saying, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone," meaning that it's not acceptable for you to judge since you have sinned as well. Again, you can always refer to love thy neighbour and the golden rule, and these are examples of how justice is shown in the Gospels. Muslims also believe that they must act in a just way and treat others fairly. This is because God is just and wants people to behave in the same way, and they would also argue that everyone is equal under Islamic or Sharia law. Justice is also the basis of zakat, one of the pillars of Islam, where Muslims give 2.5% of their earnings to the poor. Sharia or Islamic law actually uses courts, which you can find in the UK, to make sure that justice is enforced fairly. The Prophet Muhammad also acted justly when giving out punishments or rewards. And it's also an idea within Islam that people must provide for the Ummah, that's the global community of Muslims. It's not fair for one Muslim in the West to be rich, for instance, while other people are struggling around the world. As such, they must share resources with other people. Muslims believe in following God's law, which is based on the Quran and Hadith, the example of the Prophet. However, Muslims also believe that they must obey the laws of the country, even if they are not Islamic. In the UK, some Sharia courts exist and are allowed to settle minor disputes such as divorces. Sharia or Islamic law also includes rules which help to create a fair and just society. For example, Muslims are not allowed to make money from money in a way that has too great a negative effect on people. This means that they can't unfairly charge tax, for instance. Zakat is a tax that Muslims pay to the poor every year. This is because Muslims believe they are all connected as part of the same community or ummah around the world and must share the resources fairly. An example of this can be seen in some of the Muslim charities. Muslim Aid, for instance, is an organisation that tries to relieve poverty around the world and to secure justice for the poor and oppressed. It has campaigned hard to persuade rich nations to be more generous and to give resources to those who need them. Islamic Relief seeks to improve the lives of people affected by poverty, wars and natural disasters. Volunteers provide emergency food and medical relief. They also help to set up projects which provide long-term support. These aims arise from the Quran, which says, "O ye who believe, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to God." Surah 4:135. And just to repeat that, "O ye who believe, stand out firmly for justice." You could definitely use that kind of example in any question on justice, as well as why Muslims might give to charity, for instance.